So I want to welcome Mr. Minxin Pei today for our webinar today. Minxin, will start with your introduction, but before we do, just a short presentation. Um, Minxin Pei, he's a professor of government at Clements McKenna College, expert on China relations, probably one of the top ones in my opinion. He's also the editor of China Leadership Monitor, wrote some books about the topic, articles. So if you have ever want to learn more about China and also to follow what's going on, I strongly recommend you do follow him. And with that, the floor is yours
Yeah.
for the introduction. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you very much, Oren. Thanks, everybody. I will start with a very brief overview of what I think will be the points of tensions between the U.S. and China in the coming year or the coming 4 years. The overall take I have is that we are very likely to see the worst and the most dangerous deterioration in the coming years, especially the first year. The question is how low the relationship between the two countries can sink and whether tensions will spiral out of control and trigger a direct military confrontation. The worst period is likely 2025, and based on previous episodes of new administrations taking over from a different party, the first half of this year, of next year. So if we can survive 2025 without a serious military crisis, we should all celebrate. So this is a very pessimistic take. So the first issue, the issue which actually should pay more attention to is Taiwan, not tariff or trade. We've not heard a lot about Taiwan coming from Trump. He's not said a lot, but people. That's why people have an impression that he does not care that much about Taiwan. I think this is a too optimistic reading. That while it is true, Trump himself does not really care that much about Taiwan, or knows that much about Taiwan. The latter worries me even more. Uh, this can actually become a more dangerous source of conflict between China and the US. That is largely because Trump has filled his administration with hawks on China. Rubio and Michael Watts, they are very eager to pick a fight with China. They want to test China's boundaries on Taiwan and call China's bluff. So they might propose actions or gestures which Trump might not think very much of and would therefore agree or approve. But these things uh, uh, can be seen in Beijing as intolerable provocations and response. I can give you a few examples, such as approving a package of F-35 joint fighters, Aegis class destroyers. These are all platforms China would find extremely provocative, and Taiwan has actually requested, and Trump is very likely to approve. Of course, because these things will not be delivered for 5 to 10 years. China will not act immediately, but that can set off some kind of response from China. And visits by high-level U.S. officials to Taiwan, not just cabinet level secretaries have visited Taiwan, but they might be sent over far more senior people in the national security sector. And they can also allow, I think the thing that what I worried the most about is joint military drills. This would definitely cross China's red line. So China could react by, I think, some prolonged military exercise that effectively shut off Taiwan's airspace. You might disrupt Taiwan's shipping. You might even see exchange of live fire between Chinese warplanes and Taiwanese warplanes. All these things can really bring the crisis to a head and force the U.S. to respond. And so whether Trump himself will approve these or not, it really depends. His lack of knowledge might be a reason that he might approve this. Another likely reason is that he would view these gestures as leverage over China on trade issues, on other issues. So that's one. Now, what we need to watch. The first is what Trump says about about America's one China policy. Even though this policy is for all practical purposes dead in the views of the Chinese, Beijing still would like to hear from Trump himself that he's sticking with American promises on Taiwan. And the other thing to watch is what Marco Rubio and the pick for the defense secretary say during their Senate confirmations, because they will be asked about Taiwan, and we will see what they say about the one China policy. If they all say we need to deter China, blah, 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 without reiterating the boilerplate language of one China policy, that could be very, very concerning for China. And the third, an additional thing to watch is whether high-level contacts will actually resume, because Biden has put in place channels of high-level exchanges so that they can avoid miscommunication or misunderstanding. We don't know whether these channels will be kept open. In the short term, it's unlikely for Rubio to visit China. He's still under sanctions in China. He's not allowed to step on Chinese soil. Chinese officials are not allowed to meet him. So China has some logistic problems to deal with first, whether they lift the sanctions. Then Michael Waltz might be reluctant to meet with his counterpart Wang Yi because that might be seen as a sign of weakness. I think China is actually eager to resume exchange with Mike Watts just to find out what the guy is about. But if such a meeting takes place in the first 3 to 6 months, I think we should breathe some sigh of relief. And Xi and Trump will not have a chance to meet until the fall. So if things do not get out of control before the fall, then that is a good sign. Finally, I think the role of Elon Musk is very interesting. This guy has the highest level, has access to the highest level leadership in Beijing, and they will obviously try to use him as a conduit of messages to Trump, because the normal level between the normal diplomatic levels of diplomatic exchange between China and the U.S. will unlikely function well with the hawks in charge. But Musk has a direct line into Trump's ears. So he can, really sensitive issues Taiwan, he can probably give Trump less hawkish advice. So now on trade and exports, overall assessment that decoupling will accelerate in a much faster and much more chaotic manner in the next 4 years. First, we need to see whether Congress will revoke China's permanent normal trading status. There is a legislation sponsored by, among others, Marco Rubio in the Senate. So whether this gets through Congress, substantively, this legislation doesn't do much because China's tariff level is already around 20%. And if Trump adds another 10%, if not, so 60%, it so revoking the status doesn't mean anything, but symbolically it's really important because only enemies of the U.S. Get do not get this kind of status. So China would take this as just another manifestation of hostility. Second point of trade is China would largely be on the defensive. China does not have a lot of leverage against the US. But so I think China's first move is likely to try to reach out to Trump to see whether the guy wants a deal or the guy wants to decouple. We really don't know that Trump would likely to get a beautiful deal, to use his words, and but his advisor would like to completely decouple. So we don't know. Ultimately, Trump makes the call. Uh, so export control, I think this is an area we can see very serious deterioration because uh, uh, Biden has done quite a bit, but from the perspective of the hawks, this is not nearly enough. We will see most worryingly for American trade allies is that they're going to come down very hard on allies to use direct foreign product rule to make sure that they will cut off exports to China that used to be spared. The last wild card is financial sanctions. This is a tool the Biden administration has been very reluctant to deploy, but all bets are off. I think especially in terms of getting leverage over China on Iran and Russia, this seems to be a very attractive tool to deploy by the US. Okay, I think I've spoken for about 10 minutes, so it's time for Q&A.
So first question, actually, a little bit before we go into what the new administration is about to do and how China is going to react. I want to ask you, what do we see in China and coming from Beijing today? How are they preparing? What do you see from the announcements, from the actions? How are they preparing to this new Trump administration?
Yeah, I think the first thing they want to do is to get the domestic economy in order because they are in a weakened position, mostly because their economy is is stuck in neutral. Yeah, that would not give them a lot of bargaining power. Uh, so I think the first thing they're going to do next year, and the Politburo has already signaled this 2 days ago, they're going to stimulate the economy with more fiscal spending, with more monetary loosening, so that they can get the domestic demand up. They don't want to be caught in a position where their exports to the US would fall rapidly. And while they don't have any alternative source to plug the hole.
From a perspective of Taiwan, you spoke about that at the beginning. Do we see a continuation of the gray zone tactics, the encirclement strategy of basically increasing the pressure on Taiwan coming in the upcoming months before Trump takes office, or do we see probably that the Chinese leadership is going to back it down a notch or two just to avoid any confrontation? Meaning, are they going to test the new administration on that topic or not? In your opinion?
Uh, no, I think they will be in a reactive mode. As we speak today, China has sent out the largest number of ships around Taiwan. That is in response to Taiwanese President Lai's transit through Hawaii and Guam. Guam is really significant because this is where the U.S. military is based, uh, where the U.S. military assets will be used in a Taiwan contingency. So China has done something quite unusual that this is the largest deployment of naval vessels, but China did not announce it as a military drill, even though it is a military drill. And so what I think will likely happen that China will not do preemptive drills. That is, if the US doesn't do something, China will not do something to trigger a US response, but rather China will be responding to an American move on Taiwan, announcement of a large package of military hardware to Taiwan. Taiwan wants something like $30 billion of weapons from Trump. Uh, if that is so, you're going to see a very long, very aggressive gray zone tactic, a transit visit by line to the US. So these things will trigger Chinese response. But if the US does not do this, I don't think China will launch this kind of drill because it does not really serve any purpose.
We spoke about Taiwan. One other arena is the South China Sea, specifically when it comes to the Philippines. Um, how do you see that area or those tensions basically developing under the new Trump administration?
Okay. Yeah. First, I think China is trying to calm down the waters in the South China Sea. So it signed an agreement over the second Thomas Shoal resupply issue with the Philippines. So we don't see confrontation in that area. But there could be other areas. I think a few days ago, I saw a report coming from China that a Philippines vessel rammed a Chinese vessel. So obviously, such incidents can happen in the future. I think uh, uh, the Hawks, they would really want to sort of give it to China in the South China Sea. So they're proposing escorting uh, Philippines resupplying ships. They're going to step up more military drills. They've already done several multi-nation naval exercises in the South China Sea, so it could be much more aggressive. Uh, China has not really responded to these drills, but if U.S. naval ships are used to escort Philippine resupply ships or escort Philippine Coast Guard ships, then we could see ugly stuff happening. So far, the Manila has refrained from saying yes. We love your ships to come. Philippines says thank you, but no thanks. So it really depends on Manila because does Manila want a new round of escalations? I'm sure the Hawks would love to send over those ships.
How much do you think the new Trump administration is ideological when it comes to dealing with China versus pragmatic in the sense of increasing the pressure and showing a more hawkish stand in order to gain leverage versus an ideological point of view, which is really truly seeing China as not only a competitor but as an enemy?
Yeah, I think it's split. When you look at the people who have been announced, uh, who have been nominated, I think the uh, economic team is pragmatic, with the exception of the trade representative. But the trade representative is now subordinate to the commerce secretary. So uh, we don't know the role the trade representative will pick. And Navarro has been reappointed, so he is very, very ideological. So we see a split at the top. The national security team is completely ideological. Uh, I think with the exception of the DNI, Tulsi has not really, Gabbard has not really said much about China, but others, they have a huge record. Trump himself is not ideological. Uh, he's ideological in the sense of being a mercantilist. Uh, But other than that, he is transactional. So I think we all know that he's not really very predictable. He can either do things which will delight China, or he can do things that will make China really mad. Because when Trump wants to escalate, he escalates very fast, and he wants escalation dominance. So that worries China a lot. So we're going to see actually fights over China uh, at the beginning, because I don't think the commerce people, the treasury people want to have a big disruptive fight. Because China is serious, is a serious player in the global economy. And Trump, there's a 70%, 60% tariff. I think so far China does not view this as seriously, well, really seriously, because where can the US get alternative supplies? The problem is that if you cut China off, where are you going to get the stuff? That is the real issue. So I think China's assessment is that probably it's an openly sort of a shot in order to get some deal done, and they're open to this possibility. So I think another thing that Trump himself may not be aware, that he has a lot of stuff on his plate. Well, if you look at it, and his highest priority is actually domestic, mass deportation, retribution, anti-woke, uh, uh, tax cuts. He cannot afford a real crisis with China. If he gets himself into a prolonged military standoff with China, that sucks the oxygen out of the room. And that's not where his strong suit is. He's extremely good in handling them. He's a very good politician in terms of handling domestic politics. But when it comes down to foreign policy, he does not have that much control.
Some of the experts we spoke during this series of webinars have described Trump as the deal maker. And that's something that kind of characterized the foreign policy that is more pragmatic. I think you also kind of said that yourself. Is it's not ideological when it comes to China. How do you see the Chinese leadership viewing that? What do you think they're going to try to do when dealing with Trump? Are they going to offer a certain deal? Are they going to offer a certain pathway for negotiations about economics and international fair aspects? Are they going to try to buy off Trump by offering a win one hand, but not talking about others? What's going to be the Chinese policy, knowing that Trump is a deal maker in essence?
I think the policy is that they want to know what the guy wants. And that is difficult at the moment because uh, they don't have a real sort of other than Elon Musk, they they don't have direct access to Trump. Uh, they think if Trump, if she and Trump are in the same room, they can make a deal happen. But if Trump is surrounded by at least key hawks like Rubio, like the Watts, uh, then it will be hard to make this kind of deal happen. So that is their first challenge. Their worry is that Trump can be manipulated by the hawks. Uh, Not exactly on trade, but not on issues. And the other thing they worry is that uh, trade deals and other things can escalate, because one thing Trump has demonstrated, in spite of his pragmatic instincts, is that the guy wants escalation dominance. When he uh, when he responds, he can over respond. So that worries China because he can uh, increase the level of tensions or crisis to such an extent that going back to status quo ante would be very hard.
assuming we're going to see an escalation in tensions between the US and China, where do you see the Chinese policy being changing or different when it comes to Europe? Are they going to try something else? Are they going to see Europe as a kind of a continuation of the US policy? Or how's the Chinese leadership going to view Europe in an escalation scenario with the United States?
I think China will try to be very, very nice to Europe because China does not want to have a two-front war, three-front war in the next few years. I think, because it all de also depends on whether Trump is going to extend his tariff war to Europe. At the moment, it seems that Europe is intent on reaching some kind of deal with Trump to avoid a tariff war. And that will make life a little bit more difficult for China because if Europe and US relationship is tough, then China has an opening. But regardless of where the state of US-Europe relationship, China will try its best to improve ties with Europe. That's why when you look, so China is working very hard to strike a deal on EVs with Europe. And we might even see some other moves China takes in order to make sure that Europe will not be dancing to the tune of Trump. There's another thing that might work in China's favor. That is, Europe cares a lot more about Ukraine. If Trump forces Ukraine to accept a deal that is against Europe's interest, then that creates far more serious tensions between Brussels and Washington. And that will give China another opening.
One of the topics that I haven't seen being discussed much is the topic of North Korea. I remind everyone that in the first Trump administration, he went from calling Kim Jong Un Rocket Man on Twitter to meeting him in Singapore. And it was one of those policy changes that kind of change everybody's view of Trump because until that point, I think he wasn't seen so serious, and then everybody saw him as someone who was actually bringing in a new fresh air into diplomacy. Let's put it this
Yeah.
way. What do you think within that context of North Korea? Are we going to see any Chinese leadership attempt to convey to Trump that they can be an actor that pursue North Korea to accept certain deals? Are we going to see the U.S. trying to push China to pressure North Korea? How do you see that topic evolving within the context of those two countries, China and the United States?
Yeah, I don't think China sees North Korea as some kind of bargaining chip or has some kind of tool it can use. What we have seen in the last few months is that North Korea is very eager to get out of China's orbit. That worries China. If Russia is the party that is wooing North Korea, China is concerned, but not really, really, is not really going to panic. But if the US wants to reopen a dialogue with North Korea, China will be more concerned. But this is unlikely because last time Trump himself broke off negotiations. Trump knew that he was not going to get a deal. And this time, the likelihood of a deal is even worse because North Korea now has a lot more stuff. And it is not going to give up nuclear weapons. I think the real issue is whether Trump wants to be tough on North Korea. My guess is probably not, because he has Iran as a bigger fish to fry in terms of direct military conflict. So if he wants a beautiful deal, the Iranian deal might make more sense for him. It is easier to get. We're not talk about nuclear weapons, Iran is a much weaker position than North Korea. So that's my take.
When we look inside and this is a very difficult question, I'm not sure you will be able to answer, but when we look into the Chinese leadership, um, what do you think are the hawks and doves saying there? What do you think are the opinions that are circulating, or is it a one man show from that perspective? I'm trying to understand the mindset and thinking of the Chinese leadership when it comes to the new
Okay.
administration,
Yeah.
in terms of what are they debating in terms of the alternatives they have.
I think so. Look, if I have to say that Chinese leadership today probably uh, is filled with pragmatic hawks. That is, all pragmatic fatalists, not necessarily hawks, because these are the sort of the things I would use to characterize their mindset or their views about the world and about the US in particular. They think the US and China are in a Cold War, and likely it can be a hot war, so they need to be prepared. They do not see a fundamental shift in American policy. This is a generational conflict. So they resign 2, 3 decades, 4 decades of conflict with the US. But because they are in a weaker position, they do not want to initiate a fight, but they will fight if they have been forced to fight, if they are sovereignty challenged, if on Taiwan, the US crosses certain line. So that is, but what they need is they need time. Time, they believe that the situation will be uh, improved with enough time, because the trade war, the Cold War did not happen according to their time schedule. It happened probably a decade too soon for them. They did not expect the US pushback would be so fast, so systemic, and so massive. So they need to buy time. Uh, and uh, so that's and uh, but they just do. But in the meantime, they're going to be flexible. They're going to be pragmatic. They're not. They're going to respond to signs of flexibility with flexibility. You can see this in how they in Xi Jinping's dealing with Biden. And Biden has been very, very tough on China, and the Chinese know this. And initially, they did not like this at all, and at the end of the day, thought, well, this is reality, and they have to sort of live with it. And as long as they have this sort of new reality has some space for them, it's fine for them. Conflict is not really their top priority. To avoid a hot war is their priority. So I think on this issue, Trump and Xi probably are aligned.
One of the topics that Trump mentioned a lot during his campaign was the issue of fentanyl and fentanyl production. What do you think are going to be the action taken by the Trump administration, and how will China react? Or is that something that China considered to be a bargaining chip that they can play with within these negotiations and dealing with the new administration?
Well, it was a bargaining chip uh, used by China, but if sort of it depends of what Trump means by some 10% tariff. Uh, is he signaling that China needs to do more? In fact, China has been doing quite a bit. What Trump said, oh, these guys did not shoot, did not execute the criminals. That's why I'm giving them. China will be very happy to shoot a few, right? And so if that is the price China has to pay, I think China is very willing to pay. So it depends on I think what Trump really wants China to do on fentanyl. Fentanyl does not mean that much uh, uh, for China, because the amount of income is relatively small, and it's done not by state-owned companies. and China can crack down quite easily. And in fact, China has, according to what I have read, China has done quite a bit. The Biden administration is relatively satisfied with the level of Chinese support. Of course, China can do more. So if, as I said, if Trump wants China to shoot people, then it's not a big problem for China.
So another topic that Trump was campaigning about, and that was the environmental issue. Trump, unlike the Biden administration and Obama before that, is obviously does not apply the same and is not thinking about applying the same environmental policies. And one of the good questions we got here from the audience is: will China seek to step up initiatives on climate change, given that Trump administration is likely to pull the United States out of the Paris Accord again?
I think modestly, symbolically is what I would say. What China would do is to exploit the loss of American prestige, loss of American credibility on climate to tell especially the global South that, look, this is the world's most powerful country, and it does not want to help you. So I think it wants to gain some propaganda value. But in terms of real action, I really don't see. So let me just go down the list. China is actually decarbonizing faster than it has planned, largely because of the adoption of clean energy. Uh, but China does not want to commit itself to a hard target for security reasons because China wants to keep its coal in reserve. It views coal-fired plants, those so coal deposits, coal mines, facilities as a strategic reserve. So if you want to commit, then you have to take actions to decommission, to so lock yourself in a bind. So China is not going to, so in terms of meeting harder, more aggressive targets, you might see some very modest adjustment, but not real adjustment. And then the other issue is climate financing. Given the resource constraint, China is not going to step up and say, well, the US has backed out. Here's $100 billion a year. No way. China will say, well, we're going to donate clean technology. It has such oversupply, so that might be an easy thing to do. We're going to build solar farms in Africa. We're going to donate EVs. So these things we can see, but not real hard money, at least a huge increase in financial aid to the developing world for their climate transition.
So you spoke a little bit about technology, so that's a good beginning for this line of questions, which is about what we're going to see with the competition when it comes to semiconductors, AI. We know China is investing a lot in order to have their own self-reliance in their own domestic industries, especially in those two fields which are considered to be crucial looking into the future. How do we see those technological oriented tensions between the two countries developing? Are we likely to see some banning on technology, some new limitations, or China is maybe is going to try to have Western brains coming to work in China with lucrative salaries and so on? What do you think is going to happen when it comes to the technological competition between those two countries into the new Trump administration?
Yeah. I think as I said at the opening, in my opening remarks, we'll see a significant, dramatic escalation of export controls, not just direct export controls, but indirect export controls coming from U.S. allies. So that's for sure. I think the Chinese response is a far more, even more aggressive investments in its domestic technological capabilities. And second, we'll see a lot more investment in circumvention. That is, how can they bypass these controls? These controls uh, have loopholes. And the third is that they've been stockpiling a lot of equipment. It's really about the equipment and materials. And whether sort of those export controls will have lasting effect. I think the not the short term. I think short term probably they're okay because they bought like 2 to 3 years of supply. Uh, it's really the medium term, five so 3 years out when their equipment cannot be serviced, when their equipment cannot when they've run out of parts. So that's I think the impact will probably come, and it's not really the high end. The high end they're much more constrained. It's about the middle end. The lower end they can do. The middle end, like 28 nanometer, that kind of stuff. That is, they still rely on foreign-made equipment. So the unknown is what happens 3 to 5 years out. Then we'll see whether Chinese equipment can be good enough as substitutes. China began its investment in the semiconductor space in a very, very serious way only about 6 years ago. So 3, 4 years out, a decade, probably they can make some progress. So I think the immediate, as I said, the immediate impact probably will be relatively modest. The real impact will be 2 to 3 years out.
Now, we hear a lot in our discussion with experts in China about this transformation from this civil military fusion to a
Yes,
military civil fusion,
yes.
change of order in the words. How do you think this military civil fusion process that is going on in China right now, when it comes to industrial sectors, will change with this new administration and policies by the Trump administration?
Yeah, I do not. I think what the Chinese military sector is that when they do big projects, uh, they have the ability to integrate different capabilities much better than the civilian sector. The civilian sector is decentralized, so they cannot pool resources as effectively as the military sector. Let me give you an example. 20, 15 years ago, nobody thought China could build a world-class jet engine for jet fighters. Today, China can. That's because through both intellectual theft, the Russians and others, and through its ability to integrate resources, capabilities, China built that engine. So I think that is the model. When they talk about military civilian fusion, it is the ability to what the Chinese word is 攻关 is to tackle big obstacles. Uh, and the military sector has done a much better job in uh, closing gaps. When you look at the hardware, Chinese hardware has made huge strides in the last 10, 15 years, mostly because the military uses a very different model of tackling difficult obstacles.
From you spoke a little bit about the potential of doomsday scenario when it comes to financial sanctions, and just to clarify, we're talking about basically sanctions related to SWIFT or also some other stuff.
Not Swift. Uh, Not Swift is if you invoke Swift. we're talking about a war situation. Now, I can portray a doomsday scenario in a minute, okay? But initially, let's just talk about a high probability but not doomsday scenario. For example, they want to cut off Chinese purchase of Iranian oil. Very likely, right? So even though China does not use banks connected with the US dollar system to settle those trades. Trump administration, well, there was this Chinese bank. It accuses a Chinese bank without any solid evidence of financing such trades. And that bank is connected with the US dollar system. Let's say it's XYZ Bank of China. So, so this is a shot across the bow because there are huge Chinese banks. We're talking about Industrial Bank, the Industrial Commerce Bank of China, uh, the world's largest bank that's deeply plugged into the dollar system. So China, so this could be, I think, a high probability uh, sort of event in the coming year or so.
So let's talk about those scenarios. We have
Do you want
reaching
the
the
doomsday scenario? The doomsday
no,
scenario.
no.
Okay.
Let's start with the positive
Okay.
stuff
Yeah.
first.
Okay.
Then we'll go through them. Usually we go into the four ones. So let's start with the four with the one that is the optimistic one. Um, how do we see these relations in an optimistic lens evolving in the upcoming years of the Trump administration?
Okay. Now, the optimistic one is that A, Trump wants a deal, that he really does not want full chaotic decoupling. It's not bad. It's bad for him because he actually wants to leave office with some kind of uh, positive legacy. Right? If he actually wants Vance to win 4 years from now, the economy has to be good. So Vance himself, Vance is very optimistic. In his call, he can be some ideological. The people, the national security hawks are Vance's people. But if Vance is sensible, that is a good economy can increase the probability of his winning. So if Trump and Vance are pragmatic people, then they would want a deal.
So let's move
So
to
yes,
yeah.
so
Sorry.
that is what. So if they have a deal, somehow China's assumption is proven right, then they start back channel negotiation with Elon Musk as the go-between, not the hawks. Or I think more likely the treasury people, the commerce people will start talking, and they struck some kind of deal. That's it. So okay, that's the most positive scenario, and this can happen in the next year. So next year is actually crucial. We will see where the relationship is going, and the first 6 months will be really important.
So let's look into the before we go into the worst case scenario.
Yes.
The what we call a gray rhino. So what is the most likely scenario in your opinion?
Yeah, the most likely scenario is that uh, there's just so much distrust. Trump himself does not know what he exactly wants. He gets manipulated. He's very fickle. And then one relatively modest bad move leads to a worse move by either side. So they get locked in a downward spiral. Uh, so this can happen both military in the security space and also in the trade space. So they started going down a path they initially did not really want, but then they were locked into mutual escalations.
And what is the worst case scenario that we could expect?
The worst case scenario is that they lost control of escalations. The Great Rhino is still controlled escalation. They ultimately did not want to go to the end state. Up to that point, both sides said, that's enough. We're settled. So they find in the Great Rhino scenario is that they find themselves in a new status quo, which is not what they wanted, which is not very satisfactory, which is bad for both, but which is not disastrous. Now, the sort of the doomsday scenario, the sort of is that at some point, so this is sort of following the second scenario, the Great Rhino, except that one particular move they take, either side takes in response to what they think the other side's move crosses the line, becomes totally uncontrollable. So you can have Trump announcing, for example, freezing some Chinese assets. He can do, right? Sanctioning a really big bank or a U.S. military, the U.S. jet and a Chinese jet collided with each other or fired missiles at each other. You never know, right? So these things can happen.
And the last one, I always have to give a little bit of context here. So the black swan scenario, and that is not necessarily a negative one. So let me put it
Yes,
in two frameworks. The bad one, which is escalatory. For
yes,
example, Trump visit Taipei,
yes.
which is a scenario we actually played in one of our simulations, or
Okay.
a positive one, which we also played in our historical educational simulations, which is a Nixon visit China
Yes.
one. So it doesn't have to be a negative. It can be a surprisingly good. I.e., Trump meets with Kim in Singapore was, I think, for many it was a black swan. For many it was a surprise. So, what is your kind of a black swan scenario that you think and predict could be interesting? It doesn't have to be most likely, on the contrary, but most impactful, less likely, most impactful, and very interesting.
Yeah. Uh, I think not necessarily black swan. I would say that the scenario is that uh, we will see sort of not Trump goes to Beijing or Taipei, but Trump goes to Moscow. That
Mm.
is because uh, Trump has a soft spot for Putin, has a softer spot for Putin than for Xi Jinping. His advisors are urging him to focus on China. Then he does everything he can to get Russia out of its current hole. That will give Xi Jinping a huge headache because what he will be facing two challenges. One is that the US will shift attention to China, but at the same time, it's his bet on Putin will still pay off. Will Putin actually now move to closer to the US? So this, I think, will be a real test for Xi Jinping. And so it's say about gray swan. It is actually higher probability. Uh, uh, Trump can announce end of all sanctions against Russia as part of this big deal with uh, Putin. Yeah, so that's uh, I I view that Trump probably would like to invest more in that project because he wants to get Nobel Peace Prize. That's not, he's obsessed with winning. So that's something he wants to win. Uh, and so he's willing to invest a lot. So the tensions between sort of US and China could come via Moscow.
So a reverse Nixon to Beijing
Yes,
visit.
reverse. People here have been talking about a reverse Nixon for the last 5 years. Yeah.
Very interesting. As we are closing in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to ask one more question from the crowd, and then I will leave it to you for closing remarks. The question here is about basically the Trump administration policy towards Africa, and essentially, do you think China will strengthen its presence in Africa in a competitive stance against the U.S., or will China just continue its policy in the continent by simply taking advantage of any gap by the Trump administration?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. Uh, the proviso I would give is that China today does not have as much money to spend in Africa as it used to a decade ago. So China will still pay more attention, I think, especially in terms of diplomatic attention, and I would say channeling excess capacity to Africa in terms of giving them the stuff China has nowhere to sell to consume at home. So you will see some modest improvement, but not a whole lot because Africa does not really constitute such a huge it's not a huge area of strategic importance. China will spend most of its limited resources in East Asia.
So we have time for one more question before final remarks. Another one from the crowd. What is the red line for the Trump administration when it comes to China?
I uh, I think the red line exists only in Trump's mind. That is, if he thinks China has crossed the red line, let me just give you one example. COVID was the red line 4 years ago. Trump essentially told his China hawks 4 years ago, do whatever you want. I don't care. So the hawks went to work. They shut down a consulate. They kicked out Chinese journalists. They did all sorts of things. And so if China does something that crosses, so I think Trump himself does not know the red line because it's very situational. The red line that Trump always wants to be a winner. He wants to be seen as winning. So the moment he feels he's lost, that's when the red line is crossed.
So we're in the final 2 minutes, and I think that's a great opportunity to kind of sum up the webinar with your final remarks. How would you kind of summarize this whole topic? And what are your, I would say, your most important or the most interesting insights that you would like to share with us?
Okay, so these two. One is that we're paying too much attention to the economy, tariffs, export controls. I think these things can actually be managed because, at the end of the day, we're talking about money, right? Talking about business deals. It's whether one side wins more, the other side wins less. We're not talking about people getting starved. But China has a lot of resources. It can deal with a lot of problems on its own. It's not really a sort of a country that has not proven its ability to overcome difficulties. So I think we should sort of take a deep breath and say, well, things will get bad, but as long as they are waging trade wars, not real wars, things will be fine. The world will settle into a new economic reality. People will make less money, but people will live. So that's one. So I'm much more sanguine about these things. Now, war is different. We're talking about two nuclear armed war powers. So if they can manage their security tensions, if the hawks on either side do not try to take too aggressive moves, try to sort of call each other's bluff, if we survive the next 12 months without a military confrontation, I'm not saying conflict, without a Cuban Missile Crisis confrontation, we should consider ourselves lucky. If we survive the next 4 years without actually shooting war, then we should be really, really lucky. So I think the focus should really be on security, not just on tariffs and export controls.
Okay, so I want to say with that optimistic note, but but the definitely with a view into a more peaceful year, we hope. And with that, I want to conclude this webinar and thank you so much for joining us today, answering questions both from the crowd and from me. I want to thank everybody who joined us to listen. There's the audience also for the questions you made. And I also want to remind everybody that this is a part of a series of webinars that we are being conducting under the Trump 2.0 administration and the impacts it will have on international orders and relations. So do join us on Thursday, I believe, Tali. We have another webinar actually on Taiwan, more specific on that topic. We covered a little bit of it. That's why I didn't go there too much. And didn't go expanded on that topic because we're going to have a webinar with Eric Chan just on that topic itself. And we're going to follow up with a few more topics going into Christmas. So with that, thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. And that is it. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.